Welcome to Tracing Your Family Roots. I'm Janelle Blue, your host today. And I want to first of all thank the Mount Vernon Genealogical Society, who is our sponsor, and also our producer, Sidney Sachs, and his crew for making this show possible today. Our guest is my co-host, Chuck Mason. Chuck, one thing that's really important in researching is knowing the age and the gender of the person in the family.
That's for sure.
Talk to us about that.
Oftentimes there are hidden clues in records, and you really have to understand them. You have to know what were the laws in effect at the time your ancestors were living and creating records and things. And so, age often determined a lot of things, like, at what age could they be a witness, like in court? At what age could they buy or sell property on their own? What age could they vote? What age could they make a will? What age could they marry? Now we have oftentimes early on, two different ages we're dealing with, depending on whether they're a male or a female.
Oh, sure.
And so males could do a lot more than females in general, but also the age at which they might be able to do something was different. So, age restrictions are often a restriction in creating records. When did they, or were they able to do things that created documents?
An example of that, I think, is marriages.
Yes.
Because what I've often seen is if they were underage, then that marriage record named their parents.
Oh, yes.
And the fact that they had given consent.
Yeah.
And you don't normally get that in an American marriage record, at least.
Yeah, and that continued. I don't know for sure, when it may have changed, but I know my mother's sister wanted to get married, and she was born in December, and she wasn't going to be 21 until the following December. She wanted to get married in March. And my grandfather said to her, "You've waited this long, you can wait till you're 21. So he wouldn't give permission. So what did they do? They went down to Elkton, Maryland, where at 18 they could get married. And my grandparents, my father's parents, got married in Elkton because my grandmother was underage. And I had a bunch of cousins that got married there in the 50s and 60s for other reasons.
And if you're a researcher and you suddenly find this person in Elkton, Maryland, you're going to go, why are they there? Because they belong in New Jersey. That's the answer.
Or in this case, it was Pennsylvania, but it's one of those things, knowing those things, and just in case people don't know, it's called a Gretna Green, where you have a younger age that people can go and get married. And it goes back to England and Scotland. England had at one point raised the age limit at which people could get married without parental consent. Well, just across the Scottish border was a town called Gretna Green, and that's where they would go to get married. And there are a lot of these. They call them Gretna Greens, even though they're Elkton, Maryland, but there are a number of places.
How interesting.
In the state. There was a big one down in South Carolina, and I forget the name of the town, but years ago I knew somebody who was from that town. And here you had the same thing. In Virginia, they would go into DC, or they would go up to Frederick, Maryland, where they could get married. So, knowing those kinds of things will answer the question for you with a lot of those things. So it's an age restriction that causes people to do different things or possibly go different places, and why you may have somebody in court who may be still in their teens, but they can be a witness. Another state, they may be required to be 21 before they could go into court and be a witness.
You know, another example of that is guardianships.
Yes.
So when the children's father dies, for instance, and even the mother is still there, but the father's died, I've seen records where the court takes over the guardianship records and monitors the whole, because there's an estate.
Yeah. Well,
that's wonderful information.
In New Jersey, I learned this early on. It was a family that I was just doing some work on, not for anybody. I just found this interesting family, and the law was, in this case, the youngest daughter, the mother was going into court requesting that this man by the same surname, but I didn't know who he was. Turns out it was their older brother who was well into his 20s. The mother was requesting he be made the guardian of this younger daughter. The next two oldest daughters were requesting the same man be their guardian. When I got into the law, anybody under the age of 14 could not make a request as to who their guardian was. Somebody else had to do it for them. The older two were 14 or older. They could ask. And of course, I also learned, well, the mother's living. Won't she automatically be the guardian? No. This was just after the Civil War. This was 1869. The mother still had to make the request if she wanted to be the guardian. But in this case, it was the older brother.
But even if she was the guardian, you know, if there's money involved, if there's property involved, then the court is going to oversee that, and she's going to have to make annual accounts.
They have to report things, and and of course the other thing is, and in this case it was the mother had physical custody of the three girls. They lived in New Jersey. The brother lived in Philadelphia, but he was the overseer of the money. You know, he was the one the guardian of the money, and I had this with one of my sisters. When they did their wills, I ended up, if they had died and the kids were underage, I would have been the one keeping track of the money, and they had somebody else who was going to be the guardians of the kids.
Wow.
So, and that was the 1980s. So.
But all of that creates records. That's the beauty of it.
Yes. And of course, you know, like we said, different laws govern males and females differently. Land ownership is one. Single females were generally not restricted. They could own land, they could inherit it, they could buy and sell land, you know, depending on the state. They could buy and sell land. But in many states, they got married, those rights were all cut off. The husband oversaw it. So I have a couple of cases where I've done research where the wife inherited money from, or land rather, from, well, and money too, from a male relative, and she could do with it what she wanted. But she got married, she couldn't sell it when she wanted to sell it without her husband's approval.
You know, I just read a very interesting book that talked about the sort of the British customs of the colony, the colonial immigrants, and the wife, if the wife had inherited land and money from her prior husband, let's say, then the new husband, he could control it, but he also had a duty to preserve it for her children. Intact. It had to be intact. Now, what all that means, I don't know, but I think what it means is he couldn't just run off and you know, sell it and drink up the profits.
He couldn't have sold off a portion of it or the whole thing. Or, you know, and then if a woman divorces or her husband dies, it reverts back that now she can take her property and she can sell it or do with with it whatever she wants. So
Well, that makes sense, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's an interesting situation. One of the other things is naturalizations. Beginning in 1804, females could apply for naturalizations. What we had here in the United States, though, was the law until 1922. If her husband or her father, if she was underage, became a naturalized citizen, she automatically became a citizen. 1922, the law changed and everyone had to apply for their own citizenship. So females had to apply. So my Scottish great-grandparents that came over, he got naturalized in 1904. She was automatically a citizen, but there's nothing in the records that says that or anything. You have to know the law. And he had 3 unmarried sisters who never bothered with citizenship, but they could have applied for their own citizenship, but they didn't.
But that's really important to know, because you could be spinning your wheels trying to find the naturalization records during the time when she would have automatically gotten it through her father or husband.
I know a couple of people who spent lots of time trying to find their female ancestors' naturalization record because they saw on the census she said she was naturalized, and they're looking and they mentioned it and you won't find it because, my first question is, when was he naturalized?
Yeah.
And it was before 19. You won't find a record. And I've never seen in a federal naturalization record that the females being mentioned. It's always just the male. But you have to know the law again. Probate is another thing. We've kind of talked about this as far as them being able to speak for whatever they want to do with things that they inherit. Now, usually personal property, they inherit jewelry or, like expensive
household goods
and things like that they could do. But if it's land, it depends on the state, and you have to know the state law because it wasn't uniform in any of the states. So some places, one state, a female ancestor may be able to do something that in another state, the ancestor living there can't do it.
And often that the wife has a life interest in this real estate, but then it has to be reverted to the children. So she doesn't have any freedom to sell it there, because
again, depending on the law. Depending on the law. So this is why it's important to understand these things.
The law, not only the law of the federal laws, but these are really county, state laws.
And records are usually kept at the county level. So, another thing is serving in the militia or the military. Females were restricted until World War II. So basically, what you have is females who may be dressing up or disguising themselves as males, or they came to camp and they did the laundry, they did the cooking, or they did nursing or things like that. But as far as fighting, being on the front line, for the most part, unless they're going dressed up as a male, they're not.
They weren't officially in the military.
And of course, we do have a number of women in the Civil War time that did go in disguise and actually collected pensions and things like that.
Right, but that was really rare. As a percentage.
And another thing is voting. New Jersey was very progressive. Early on, New Jersey allowed women to vote in any election, state or city or county election,
but not a federal. Right.
And then sometime in the early 1800s, they reversed that law and made it. Nope, they couldn't. Now the other thing you did have was in some of the western states, they could vote in like school board elections and things like that. So
things that are typically associated with women.
Yeah. And of course they couldn't hold public office a lot of the time. So it's one of those things. So there's a lot of these things that what's going on in the record will give us clues to what is really going on, what the laws and the restrictions are. But we need to know what is the law in the state that our ancestors are living in, and again at the time frame that they are living, because laws were constantly changing. So we have to go and look at things if we can't figure it out from the record. One of the things, as I said in an earlier show, is making sure you totally understand the legal terms of things.
Right.
Don't assume that you may know a part of it, but you may not know the whole definition from beginning to end. And it's important to know that, because sometimes that tells you what is going on.
So where do you go to learn about the laws of a particular state at a particular time?
One of the things that I have done for a long time is, if I have something that comes up, and I used to, I don't in recent years, I don't get to New Jersey like I used to. When my parents were still living, I was up there every month for at least a few days. I'd go to the state archives, and I had my favorite staff member. In fact, it kind of toward the end got to be, what's Chuck's question of the trip going to be for Catherine? And I would say, okay, Catherine, I want to know about this, or I want to know about that. And she, most of the time, could go over, they had all the statute books on bookshelves in a corner of one of the rooms. She could go over and pull the book out that the statutes would be in, or she knew where to look it up. So that's one of the places. But a lot of things online now. There are so much online. Of course, you can go to law libraries. If you happen to live near a major university, most of the time they're going to have in their law library the statutes for the states. The one thing you want to make sure you do is check beforehand and make sure that there's not a major exam coming up. Because oftentimes they won't even let you in if you're a student, if they're preparing. But you don't want to hit there when it's filled with all these students trying to study up for an exam. But using law libraries, and we have so many of them around here in the DC area, but also going online and posing your question, and specifically putting in
Google.
That's the one that I use, but not everybody uses Google. But putting in, what is your question? What state are you looking at? What time period are you looking for?
Chuck, the National Genealogical Society publishes these research in the states books.
Books, yes.
And there's one, not for every state in the U.S., but that's worth looking at, because they will often tell you, when death certificates were required, what the ages were, and so forth. And if you don't want to plow through a law library, sometimes that'll give you a simple answer.
I've never actually gone to a law library. I have used the state archives in New Jersey. I have also asked questions in the state archives in Harrisburg for Pennsylvania, but I've also gone on to Google and looked for what I'm trying to find.
I've gone to the Texas Almanac. Now, this is not the current ones, but the old ones way back. They were trying to educate the population, and they wanted people to rely on those. And so they would often print whatever new law had
Laws.
passed.
Yes.
And I have gotten answers in those things before too. Those, you know, you can go to whatever your state archives probably has copies of those early almanacs, but they aren't just for the weather and the crops.
No. Almanacs have got lots and lots of
All
information
kinds of stuff
in them. I used to buy them just about every year, just mainly for the changes. And when I got into genealogy, I was glad that I saved them, because there were so many things that I referred to them. And of course, then I kind of saved a couple, but I got rid of some. But I pulled, one of the things that I loved about them was a perpetual calendar. So you wanted to know, what day of the week was your birthday on? You know, things like that.
Oh, yeah.
You could go to the calendars, the perpetual calendars, and find that out. So
sometime you could even find out what the weather was forecasted for a particular time of year if
Yes.
you're writing about something
Yes.
and you want to know.
Yeah. So, you know, we need to know what the laws are in the state where our ancestors lived. And some of us are lucky and our ancestors only lived in one state. And some of us are like me, where one side of the family, my father's side, is basically from New Jersey, and my mother's side is basically Philadelphia. There's rumored, and I'm still trying to prove it, that her mother's family was in Bucks County, right next door to Philadelphia.
Right, yeah.
So I really only have two states. But, you know, you have to understand, what are the laws and how do they differ? And we talked about before vital records. You know, that's one of the things. New Jersey has the second oldest, beginning May 1st, 1848.
That's remarkable.
Pennsylvania, they don't begin continually until 1906. Now, there were some counties, and I'm very fortunate that they came over to Philadelphia and basically stayed there for many years. Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, they had vital records going back into the time of the Civil War. I think Philadelphia is 1860 or 61 that they begin there. You know, so there I've got, you know, two different vital records, you know, and what are the regulations as far as marriage? What are the regulations as far as land ownership? What can you do with probate records? How does the law affect probate and writing a will? And you know, what is also the law if you don't have a will? Who inherits? It's not uniform from state to state. So the people who are eligible to inherit in one state may be different from the group in another state.
Or at least at that particular time. whenever that intestate.
And so going through you know, those statutes and trying to find, or, you know, sometimes I have said to people, read the records before and after your ancestors to see. For example, this Madeira family that I was trying to find out, why was this man being asked, or why was he being requested to be the guardian of these girls?
Yeah.
Wasn't the mother automatically the guardian? Well, I read about 15 or 20 guardianship records before and after, and in every case, the mother, even if she was ending up or being the one requesting that she be made, the mother still had to make that request to the court. So I didn't need to go look at the statute.
Wow.
I knew this has got to be the law. She still, even though she's the blood relative, she's the one that gave birth to these children, still had to go to court and apply to become their guardian. So things like that can help you, that you don't really have to
Yeah.
go off and look at
Yeah.
outside
That
sources.
poses a whole bunch of other questions. So Chuck, you did a chart, which we aren't going to post it here,
No,
but
we don't have time.
but some of the ages
Yes.
of males and females are quite young.
Yes.
For these. Now, was there a time frame that you were looking at? or-
I actually was gathering my information from a couple of sources. And no, but you have to think, people didn't live that long. You know, early on,
Right.
the average age was maybe 40 for people to die. So, you know,
Yeah.
they did allow, I think there's one case where there was a state where a 12-year-old female could get married without her parents' consent.
or serve as an apprentice?
Yes.
Be punished for committing a crime?
Crime.
Sign contracts, a 12-year-old female.
Yes.
Serve as an executor? Make a will?
Yeah.
Marry?
So, you know, it's
Amazing.
we have to think of the time frame and the lives and the life expectancy and, you know, all of those things to really understand that, you know, to restrict someone until they're 21 to do things, they may be dead by the time they're 40. They're, you know, they've been restricted more than half of their life.
Yeah.
So it really is something that you have to explore
You have to
all the different aspects of it to
keep in mind
understand.
when they lived
Yes.
and what the rules were then, because
Yes.
it's quite different from today,
yes,
isn't it?
It certainly is.
Well, Chuck, this has been very informative, and I thank you very much.
You're welcome.